Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Decisions Now. I am your host, Erin Pearson, along with Rigvi Chavala. Today we are very excited because our guest is Briana Brownell, and she is the founder and CEO of Pure Strategy, which is an AI firm. And we are here to talk about maturity curves within AI, amongst a few other topics. But just to kick this off, I guess first, welcome, Briana.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, Brianna.
Awesome. So one of the things that we had been talking about before is the maturity model of within analytics. So the tradition, there's a lot of different models naturally that you can lean towards, though one of the most common ones is from descriptive, which is a bit of looking at hindsight, into diagnostic, then predictive, then prescriptive, which is really looking at foresight. So where do you guys see most people are ending up on this maturity curve when they are implementing AI?
I'm actually seeing that there's a really wide range of organizations here. And so this definitely varies by industry. There are industries that are sort of ahead of the curve at the moment. But there are a lot of industries that are actually lagging a little bit. So areas where most of the analytics are, really just starting to bubble up in the organization. So they're far from that predictive and prescriptive sort of maturity in their analytics area.
Yeah, I think the standard statistic, I guess it depends again on which curve you're looking at, but I think Forrester has it that approximately 50% are more in this beginning phase of their analytics journey. Rigvi, is that what you're seeing too?
It is. And, to Brianna's point, right, there are literally some of the segments that are very mature. One thing that comes to my mind is the elevators companies, right? And they've been at this for almost 8 years now. And they're probably by far the most mature segment, but they're also non-critical mechanical, industry, right? Aerospace has been doing this even before that. That's the critical mechanical. But then you go to the other end of the spectrum, CPG and some of the retail, they're still figuring out how to get to that prescriptive analytics journey. But at least they've started, to your point, it's probably 40% sounds right,
So how would you guys actually, when you're working with people, how do you help them evolve from these different phases? Because you can't just go from beginning maturity to the end of it. There has to be a lot of different steps, and it takes a long time to do that. There's a lot of foundations that you have to set up to get it right. What do you guys see actually works really well when people are trying to advance?
So I mean that's a good question. What I've seen successful in some organizations is having an sort of internal innovation team that is sort of a go-to group in the organization that sort of helps build some of the skills and do some of the educating for groups throughout the organization. So they would have a really strong team that really understood how analytics could help different work groups in the organization, and they would be the one that would sort of evangelize some of the possibilities that the different groups could employ. The reason that that's successful often is that it's difficult to hire data scientists in, every different part of the organization, right? I mean, sure, I am a data scientist, so, I would love to see everybody can be a data scientist and you can just hire, 100 of us. That would be wonderful. I love that. But, think about the budget for doing that and think about how much, sort of the rest of the team would struggle to sort of integrate those people into that group. And so having a kind of a internal team focused on it, I've seen that work really well.
And
So
I'm sorry, I was
go
just
ahead,
going to ask
Rigvi.
a quick question, right, Brianna? I think getting data scientists obviously is the ideal state, and of course having each function do their own stuff. But also, how do you see people even identifying the data that they need? In some cases, again, going back to that elevator example, I was looking at a video, not a podcast, but a video where a person was explaining how they had to go retrofit a lot of elevators with sensors to even get to a point where the data was, uniform, right? Before they could even start the first analytics model that they had to build. So how do you see that identification process in general?
Yeah, so it all starts with people asking good questions in the organization. So understanding where the potential use cases are, how products can be improved, how different markets can be entered, different kinds of efficiencies that might be able to be taken given some advanced analytical projects. So it has to do with making sure that people at all levels of the organization are sort of asking questions on how they can improve their sort of part of the organization. So, you can't find an answer without a good question. And so, focusing on trying to find those good questions, I think, is key.
That's a good way to put it.
So you had said that like there's this innovation team that comes in, and I would think that actually like, the innovation team, it makes the most sense, as you mentioned, to put them as like a central unit, and then they feed information to everybody in the company, because I think part of the problem that people have when they're getting started in this journey is their analytics are all over the place. So part of it is you want it to come into one central view, because you also want people to be making decisions off of the same data set. Now, the challenge with that is you have a procurement team on one side, a marketing team on another. They want different data. They're making different decisions. So how do you actually put together a system where you can use like cohesive data to drive towards the company's end goal, but how do you get it so the data is actually giving each team their unique answers?
So that is a really difficult, and sticky question to answer, because, like you said, a lot of organizations had sort of small data science or analytics teams, or sometimes forecasting teams, or teams that were really heavy data users, sort of like all throughout the organization. So the marketing team was probably a really heavy user of analytics, audience measurement, that kind of thing. The finance group was probably doing forecasting. They were probably looking at crunching a bunch of data in that area. The IT area, probably operations, et cetera, et cetera. But then to have that kind of united, non-siloed sort of single version of the truth, or single source of the truth. So you can, if you can create that within the organization, then everything can flow from that. But that first push to really unite all of those groups can be really challenging. The other consideration, especially in really large organizations, when you have acquisitions, or if you have mergers between companies, those data sources need to be integrated within that organization. So it creates sort of another challenge in how to structure that. So we see these solutions that are, they've really been hybridized and morphed throughout the years. And it is very difficult to sort of create that as a sort of singular place, but it becomes so important. So it's a lot of work to get there, but once you have it, it can be magical.
Now, we absolutely have a real life example there. One of our customers in logistics really started this journey almost 2.5 years ago. And to your point, it did take them a while to get to that steady state. But now they have a super duper centralized analytics vision and a group, right, with a consistent leader there. And all the departments within the organization have visibility into what their pipeline looks like. And of course, this is not a sales pitch. We also delivered a tool called Use Case Hub. Of course, you can pick any tool in the market. I mean, ours is one of them, which literally provides that visibility you were talking about. Because without that, there's really no empathy of, a procurement team could say, hey, why is my algorithm or my project behind this one, right? Then you could see the priority, the relative priority, see what the impact that it's going to generate. And so then everyone is on the same page, So the tool, in fact, says, impact to the organization X dollars. And so then there's really no argument for someone to say, hey, put my project in front of this, right?
So, Brianna, one of the things that we had actually talked about before also was this topic isn't that new. Like people have been talking about data and analytics, AI for like 10 plus years. It depends on when you want to start the timeline for it. Why is it still one of the hottest topics today? Like, why haven't people been able to move the needle in this time frame? This is a question for both of you.
This is a really interesting question because I have this strangest factoid that I've heard for a long time. So if you look at Google Books and you look at the words that are in all of the books in the world, and you think of the word data, okay, when do you think the word data was most popular? In what year?
Say 2005.
I'm gonna get this totally wrong.
No,
Was it
it's not
2005?
2005. Do you have a guess, Erin?
Okay. I'm gonna go 1984.
You know what? You are obviously much more closely on the pulse of this than I am because it's in around 1980.
Wow.
So it has actually been declining since 1980. So I find that so fascinating because, we've had data, we've thought about data for decades, but now we're starting to think about it in a much more sort of sophisticated way and being able to actually use it and implement things in all areas of, industry and all areas of organization. So this is a problem or challenge that we've been tackling for a long time. And so, it's important, I think, to keep it all in context and think, a lot of the best practices around it have been developed and refined and tested. And, so it's not just using the cutting edge, leading edge thing, it's thinking about everything sort of in that context. And we can really learn from, the people who have gone before.
Right. And Aaron, another factor, is it's a moving target. Remember the SD cards we used to use in our cameras? Well, they're no longer SD cards like, the way we used to remember those. It's 64 gigs, 128 gigs and more. I'm like, how are they fitting so much memory into that little thing? So that is the moving target too, is as we catch up and we evolve, the amount of data is growing too. So the rate of evolution is still, we're playing catch up there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that it's enabling everybody to do is unlock new possibilities in areas that they'd never even thought of before. Rigvi, you had mentioned the elevator example, which I'd actually be interested to know, like what are they solving with by putting in the chips within the elevators? But Brianna, I know that you've also talked a lot about within healthcare. How are doctors using this information? I will be upfront. I can't remember the study, so I'm going to fall on my face right here. But there was one study where doctors started using AI to track certain diseases, and AI was able to predict better when somebody was released from the hospital if they were going to survive or not afterwards. And no one understood why this was happening. So what are some of what are in your mind, since you guys are very close, you guys are both very close to it, what are some of these coolest new possibilities that are happening because AI is available?
So I love the idea of having AI as something that can augment what humans do. So, looking at healthcare, not thinking about it like, oh, we want to replace the healthcare professionals. We want to, sort of make it so that we have an additional system to make the whole thing better. So if we have an AI, the interesting thing about medical diagnosis using computer vision, for example, often what happens is the kinds of things that doctors are looking for and the kinds of things that the AI is picking up are actually different things. So you can see how then when you put both of those together and you kind of team up with the AI, so, doctors and the robots are teaming up, then you get a better result. And so for me, like, that's really the promise of AI. It's not that we want to replace things that humans can do. It's that we want to allow humans to do all of the things that they're wonderful at, add the most value that they can, and do the things that really only humans can do.
Absolutely. No, in fact, I remember in one of my doctor's visits, I was talking to the nurse after the doctor left, right? And she was obviously entering stuff into the system. I asked her curiously, hey, what software do you guys use? And she said Epic, which is one of the biggest healthcare systems, right? And I was asking, does it give you any kind of suggestions or what doctor says in terms of the symptoms to what the diagnosis is, right? Potentially. And she said, there is a module where it tells it after the doctor's done. So it's not influencing what the doctor is thinking about, but there's a second level of check to say, hey, are you way off or were you close enough, right? What does the machine think? And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if they've switched that in the meantime, but it was a while ago. But the point is, it cannot be either or, right? If just the machine told me, hey, you have cold or COVID, that's not going to give me that confidence. And if the doctor just says that without spending 2 more minutes with you, then you might not have that confidence. But a machine checking that might give you that validity, right, in general. So totally agree.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, like with some of those diagnostic tools. One of the challenges, of course, in medicine is always rare diseases. And so the saying is, if you hear hoofbeats behind you, you don't imagine it's a zebra, you automatically think it's a horse. But the zebras do exist, right? And so the challenge is when you have these patients that have a rare disease and they go through rounds and rounds and rounds of misdiagnosis. Maybe it's this, let's try this, let's do some more tests. Like it's a huge time commitment, and it's really challenging sometimes for some of these patients to finally get to a diagnosis that is true. And that has nothing to do with whether the doctor is good or not, right? Because of course, what do you think it is, the zebra or the horse? Well, you're not going to automatically say, oh, it's a zebra every time, right? So I think that with some of these AI tools, maybe we can sort of suss that out more easily, because these AI systems can find patterns that humans may not be able to sort of detect, because they would need to see thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of patients to be able to see some of those patterns.
So within that, and also because we went down this healthcare track, what about the data privacy behind all of this information? So how are people actually securing it? A classic example is the Target one, where a Target algorithm was able to predict that a teenager was pregnant before her father knew, and that's how he found out. So where does the privacy come in? Similar to like shopping behaviors, AI seems to know more about us than we do sometimes.
That is a wonderful question, because it's so important. And, we've seen globally different jurisdictions starting to implement more and more sort of privacy legislation, both around healthcare, but also around all kind of online activity, all kinds of data collection. And, the gold standard right now, the one that, many of the new privacy laws are based on, is GDPR. And so some of the, I'm not going to get deeply into that, but, one of the sort of principles around that is being able to understand what data is collected about you. So being able to access that, and also being able to opt out. And so obviously there's much more than that. But those two principles I think are really important, because you can think about all of the times in your life where you've given data to a company, but you actually don't know how they're using it. So the Target example, they probably didn't know how that data was being used, and they probably didn't opt in. And so right now we're seeing a lot more interest in saying, okay, how can I control data about myself. And I think that's really positive.
Yep, agree. I've seen more and more of those pop-ups on the websites these days. Of course, some of them make it like 3 clicks to get to that to reject everything.
Oh, the dark
and
patterns,
some people
yep.
make it, yeah, right. There's a button that says reject all. I think maybe there's some standards that they have to improve there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's a whole nother podcast episode, I think, is that.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's quite interesting because then you even have pieces where like just cameras are tracking people's behaviors as they're walking around and being able to say based on certain signage inside stores, you can track how people's behaviors are. Perhaps that's not always on a personal level, but just being part of this data collection, how do people actually feel about that? And looking at Facebook over the past few years and the number of lawsuits around that. And one of the things that's also interesting is a freemium model where Facebook set essentially is they're going to take your data to make it free, but they don't offer a premium version where you can say, I'm going to protect my data where you're not going to use it. So I think all of those are quite interesting. Yeah. So I know that we're low on time here. So Brianna, I did want to ask you one question to end on kind of a fun note too. So one of the things I had realized that you had done recently, if I'm not mistaken, is you wrote a PBS show episode that was called Why We Dream. So can you tell us the background and the story behind that?
Absolutely. Well, I've always been interested in encouraging young people to consider science and technology as a career. Some of the most impactful things for me when I was growing up was like Bill Nye the Science Guy, for example. And it was just so exciting to see these people doing fun things with science and, explaining it in a way that was sort of accessible to me when I was a kid. And so I started kind of looking into that. And so I've done some work with, Discovery, PBS. I've got a couple other shows on the go as well, because I really believe in that. I really think that having something that's fun and accessible can make science seem like the really good and really fun career choice that it is.
I think that's awesome. And I was watching some of the episode. I haven't been able to watch the full thing yet, though it's really fun. It's super engaging. You have a lot of other talks on YouTube, and it's awesome how you're pulling all of this together. You're making it accessible, and you're making it easy for people to learn a topic that a lot of people are kind of scared.
It's so much fun
as well.
So I've got a couple other episodes on the go, so look for them soon.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
Well, Brianna, it was awesome having you on today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Great to talk with you both.
Thank you, Brianna.
This podcast was produced by Heartcast Media.